Welcome to Vector News 24. I'm John, and this is our end-of-day recap for Wednesday, April 15th at 5:30 p.m. New York time, as the New York Stock Exchange closes for the session. Today's close sees U.S. equity markets trading in a mixed but broadly positive range, continuing the risk-on tone we've seen over the past few sessions. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite both ended the day slightly higher, supported by another strong showing in major tech names, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average tracked near the flat line, as some industrials and financials held back the overall move. The underlying story remains one of resilience. Earlier in the week, investors were worried about the combined impact of elevated oil prices and geopolitical tension in the Middle East. But today's session suggests that markets are starting to price in a more optimistic outlook, especially after news of ongoing talks between the U.S. and Iran to de-escalate the situation. That's helped ease fears of a prolonged energy-led inflation shock, which in turn has supported both equities and the bond market. From an economic data perspective, the week's Producer Price Index release came in a touch above expectations, confirming that input price pressures are still elevated, but the reaction in the market was muted. Traders are focusing less on a single hot print and more on the broader narrative that the Federal Reserve can still manage the macro backdrop without a major policy shock. Upcoming reports on housing and labor markets in the days ahead will be key to confirming whether the soft landing scenario holds. On the financial news front, earnings season continues to drive sector-level moves. Major banks and several large-cap names have reported results that are shaping sentiment around net interest margins, loan growth expectations, and credit quality. So far, the tone has been more positive than feared, with many firms highlighting resilience in domestic demand, even amid higher cost conditions. This is helping to keep the financial sector sell-off in check and supporting the broader equity rally. For investors watching the close, the key takeaway is that today's move is part of a larger, constructive trend rather than a one-off reaction. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq are consolidating gains after a recent surge, while the Dow remains more range-bound. Focus on how the indexes held today's intraday high and low, as that will tell you whether the recovery is gaining traction or if sellers remain close to the surface. Now let's move to crypto, gold, and silver, and mining-related news before we turn our attention to Asia and what to expect from the April 16th opening there. On the crypto front, Bitcoin finished the day in the mid-$71,000 range, down about 1% over the last 24 hours after a brief push above 73,000 earlier this week. The pullback is being driven by a mix of profit-taking, resistance near key price levels, and cautious sentiment as markets wait for the next batch of U.S. inflation data and fresh signals from the Federal Reserve. Spot Bitcoin ETFs have also seen outflows, which is adding some extra pressure on the crypto price structure. Despite this dip, Bitcoin remains within a broader consolidation range, roughly between $70,000 and $73,500, and many analysts see this as a normal consolidation after the recent rally, rather than the start of a full-fledged correction. Ethereum is following a similar pattern, with prices slightly lower today, but still holding within a relatively tight range. The narrative around Ethereum continues to be tied to both macro risk sentiment and the broader crypto ecosystem, including activity in DeFi, NFTs, and Layer 2 protocols. If broader risk asset mood turns more constructive, Ethereum typically leverages that move quite quickly. Shifting to precious metals, gold and silver are trading in a defensive range today, but with a clear upward bias. Gold remains well above its pre-2025 levels, reflecting ongoing demand for a hedge against geopolitical uncertainty, currency volatility, and any lingering inflation worries. Recent price action has been supported by a weakening U.S. dollar and a drop in oil prices, which is easing fears of an energy-driven inflation spike. Spot gold is trading near the upper end of its recent range, while silver has also seen a strong rebound, outperforming gold on the day thanks to renewed industrial demand optimism. For mining stocks, the story is more mixed. Gold mining equities have benefited from the firm tone in the underlying metal, with several large-cap producers trading higher and outperforming the broader market. Silver mining names have seen even stronger gains, as silver's price surge gives them extra leverage. However, base metal miners and some industrial-style resource plays are under pressure, reflecting the softer tone in broader industrial sector sentiment. Overall, the message from the crypto and precious metals markets today is that safe haven demand and risk asset positioning are both in play, but the balance is tilting more toward resilience than panic. That's consistent with the broader equity market tone we're seeing in the U.S. session. Now let's turn to Asia, where we'll cover how the region is closing out its trading day and what to expect from the April 16th opening. While the NYSE is closing at 5:30 p.m. New York time, Asian markets are wrapping up a session in which risk-on sentiment has been broadly supportive. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 finished the day higher, confirming the optimistic tone that flowed over from yesterday's U.S. rally. Japanese exporters, including automakers and electronics firms, led the gains, supported by a relatively stable yen-dollar relationship and a backdrop of cautious monetary policy from the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan's message remains that it will keep yields low and support domestic growth, which is helping to cap any sharp moves in the yen and providing a broadly supportive backdrop for Japanese equities. Beyond Japan, mainland China's indexes are closing in a mixed to slightly positive range, as investors balance the impact of higher oil prices with expectations for continued policy support from Beijing. Hong Kong-listed shares, especially in financials and real estate, are closing with a modest gain, reflecting the supportive tone in global risk sentiment, even as higher funding costs remain a concern. The broader Asian session has been constructive, which is a positive signal for the later part of the U.S. trading day, because strong moves in Asia often feed into European and U.S. sessions by influencing futures and options flows. As we look ahead to the April 16 Asian opening, there are several key things to watch. First, the Nikkei 225 will likely start the session on a positive note, given the strength in U.S. tech and the easing of geopolitical tensions. However, any surprise headlines from the U.S. or Europe overnight could reset the tone quickly. Second, the yen-dollar relationship will remain a key factor, as a stronger or weaker yen can affect the competitiveness of Japanese products and the earnings outlook for exporters. Third, any fresh data from China or Hong Kong on the economy or policy decisions will be closely watched as investors continue to assess the health of the region's growth engine. For traders watching the NYSE from the other side of the world, the key takeaway is that today's move is being supported by a global backdrop rather than just a US-only rally. If the Nikkei and other Asian indexes hold their gains into the overnight session, it increases the odds that US markets can defend their levels or even extend today's rally into the afternoon and tomorrow's open. Conversely, any sharp late-session reversal in Asia could spark more caution in New York. That's your update from Vector News 24 on Wednesday, April 15th at 5:30 p.m. New York time. As the NYSE closes for the session, markets are cautiously constructive, supported by a rebound in tech, a mixed but manageable economic data picture, and a relatively stable backdrop in Asia. Crypto is consolidating after a recent surge, and gold and silver are holding their defensive roles as safe haven assets. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Vector News 24, and hit the bell so you don't miss our daily updates. We're here to bring you clear, no-hype coverage of the stock market, economic indicators, financial news, crypto, and the precious metals and mining sector markets every day. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm John, signing off from Vector News 24.